Hi, this is Dr Emma Offord, host of This Voice is Mine, the Unquiet Podcast. For every neurodivergent mind that was masked, misread or missed, where identity is reclaimed and the system gets named, This Voice is Mine is a podcast for those who were told they were too much, too sensitive, too chaotic, too intense or not enough. Hosted by myself, Dr Emma Offord, a clinical psychologist, neurodivergent woman and unapologetic system disruptor. This podcast explores what happens when difference is pathologized and what becomes possible when we drop the shame, the script and the medical model. Through stories, reflections and conversations with people who were never meant to fit, This Voice is Mine reclaims the truth of neurodivergent minds, bodies and ways of being. This is not about fixing or fitting in. It's about remembering who we are and unlearning everything they got wrong. Today I'm joined by Rachel Clark, autistic and ADHD advocate, speaker, author, and one of the youngest guests we've ever had on the podcast. Rachel's debut book, How to Save Your Own Life, is a powerful and deeply reflective account of growing up as an unidentified autistic girl, navigating mental health struggles, eating disorder treatment, situational mutism, and ultimately finding a way back to herself. What struck me most as I read the book wasn't simply Rachel's story, but the questions it raises about how often autistic young people are misunderstood, how often distress is mistaken for defiance, how often treatment focuses on changing the person rather than understanding the environment around them. This is a conversation about identity, survival, recovery, and what becomes possible when we stop asking what's wrong with people and start asking what they need. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's amazing to have you here and amazing to meet you in real life.
Yes.
So for our audience who might not know you as well as I do, would you mind telling them a little bit about your work, a little bit about what's going on for you in your life right now?
Yeah, so my name's Rachel, and I'm an autistic ADHDer. I guess for me, I do a lot of advocacy work on social media. I also deliver autism training for a job, which I absolutely love, and doing all things book as well. I can't believe it came out 2 months ago. It's like, it feels like a long time, but also not that long at all. But I've just been loving it every second. And I think for me, it's just so surreal to be able to use my voice as a catalyst for change because, that's all I've ever wanted. Yeah.
So we were just talking a few minutes ago, weren't we? And I was saying how much I loved your book and just how emotionally intelligent it is, how mature it is, like to have that insight, and how I believe lots of professionals should read this book because it really speaks about what it says, how to save your own life, but I think it directs other people to have a better insight as well so that they can also support other neurodivergent individuals. So tell me a little bit about your book, because some people might not have read it, and you're 19 now, that's right?
Yes.
So how old were you when you read it?
So
wrote it, sorry.
That's good. Yeah, so I wrote it when I was 17 years old. So I mean, even looking back, I just think, it's such an autistic response to sort of not understanding something and not seeing yourself represented because there was no books on autism and eating disorders out there when I was really struggling. And I think it's a very autistic response to then go and write it.
Yeah.
But that's what I did at 17 because I think for me, partly because a way of processing what I was going through was writing, because I was situational mute, I really struggled to convey my internal world. So writing was a way of communicating my internal world, my brain that for so long no one had understood. Yeah. So I found that so freeing. And I guess the reason that I wrote it was because I didn't just want to figure out, recovery. And I didn't think recovery was possible. But once I had sort of started on that journey of recovery and saving my own life, I didn't want to just sort of, hold that information. I wanted to share it with the world. And I think that was really important for me because when you go through something that holds such immense pain and so beyond difficult, for me, my natural response is that I just want to give even just one other person 1% more hope that they can save their own life.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, part of my healing journey was also writing the book, because I hope that even just one person will be positively impacted by the words that I've chosen to write in it.
Mm-hmm. I often use the term not for nothing. So for me, that means whatever I went through or someone else, if we can sometimes make it not for nothing.
Yes.
And that sounds to me like your book, part of that is not for nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure hear more about your story and some of the
Yes.
challenges that you've been
Yeah.
through. So to see you sitting here 2 months after the release
Yeah.
of your book at such a young age with such a fantastic book, I mean, that's certainly not for nothing. That you achieved that. So would it be okay to hear a little bit
Yes.
about your journey?
Yeah, so I think, and I feel like this is quite, a relatable experience for a lot of people who grow up undiagnosed autistic, female and high masking. But when I was, probably 6 years old, I started struggling with my mental health. And for me, I think I was always acutely aware that I was different. And I think for me, when I look back at my childhood, even though I come from a loving family, for me, especially in environments in which I couldn't control, things like school, I wanted to fit in because I wanted to be loved. And I thought that was the only way I could be loved, was to fit in. So I think looking back, my brain developed mental health challenges as a way to cope and as a way of trying to survive in environments that I quite literally could not survive in. So, from the age of 6, developing OCD, it was treated on a surface level approach, with treating OCD and bleeding hands with hand cream. It means you have lovely soft hands, but it does not solve the problem. And I think that was quite a common theme growing up, is that all the different manifestations and the way that my mental illness had shape-shifted into something else, all these different coping mechanisms underneath the surface level was a root cause that was so desperately needed to be addressed.
Absolutely.
And I think it was only, after many years of struggling, with anxiety, depression, OCD, all of these things, it was when I was, I guess 13, 14, 15, that it became the eating disorder. And I think for me, I think that it is so difficult to, I guess the thing with an eating disorder is, for me, and obviously this isn't the case for everyone, but for me, it wasn't just invisible, it did become visible. And I think for me, that was then a way of saying, I am not fine. But it was in a way of other people understood that, because for other people to look at me, they could then see that I wasn't doing okay. And actually that was my way of saying I am not fine, in a way that I guess people finally understood, after a lifetime of masking and pretending to be fine when underneath everything you're not fine.
This is why I love your book so much, because in the work that we do, this is what we see. Week after week are late identified or unidentified people who they're the secondary, I guess you would call them, consequences of maybe being unidentified and high masking and pushing and suppressing and not maybe knowing why you feel the way that you do and why things are more difficult. And we do see a lot of eating disorders, we do see a lot of OCD, and other people might make that suggestion of treating that surface level disorder in quote marks, because I don't like to use that language, but if we listen to it carefully, it has a lot to say, doesn't it? And I think your book really brings voice to that. It really clearly says, if you're unidentified, this, what gets missed basically when you're sticking to a stereotype or a basic understanding and staying with the maybe medical model around disorder and not being a bit more curious about, is there something underlying? Are there other roots? Why would this be here? And maybe you'll have something to say about this, but in my work and my experience, there are a lot of myths around eating disorders, and there is not enough research yet around neurodivergence and the link, or sensory sensitivity and sensory seeking in the link. So I think your book is really, you know, it's pioneering in that way, that it's giving voice to all of that.
And I think, you know, that's something that I really wanted to sort of explore in the book. You know, eating disorders are not a choice, and that is just a fact. Like, you do not develop. Eating disorders are just not a choice, but also they don't develop for no reason. And I think that's something that I learned in terms of when I became unwell. You know, I didn't only feel that I had almost failed at life and, you know, at being, you know, like everyone else, because no longer could I do the things that everyone else was doing. But I also felt like I had failed at recovery. And I think that's what took me to such a dark place, was because, you know, I just felt like I could not recover because I just fundamentally couldn't. And I think looking back, that's because treatment wasn't adapted for my brain. And that's exactly what I wanted to cover in the book, because for me, I used to read literature on eating disorders, and while I do have an eating disorder, a lot of it just wasn't relatable. And that's because for me, it was never about the way I looked. It was always about the way I felt. And I think I can only speak from my own experience, but I think a lot of people I know, you know, there is always going to be, you know, the element of how you feel. But for me, you know, it was just everything about how I felt and never about how I looked. And for me, you know, I just think you shouldn't have to get to that crisis point to be heard, you know, and believed and be seen and validated as an individual. Because for me, I've learned so much about myself. Obviously, I found out I'm autistic, like all of these things. But I think looking back, you know, you shouldn't have to get to the point of where you literally physically and mentally cannot cope anymore to figure out those things. And that's why I think these conversations are so important, because I hope there'll be someone else out there, maybe, you know, younger version who is similar to me, you know, and who will relate to this and who can then start their own journey of exploration, and not have to, I guess, figure it out once they hit that crisis point.
This is what I'm so passionate about when it comes to the growing awareness around neurodivergence, because in the work that I do, I see the safety that it brings, because it brings identification earlier on for people, because it's also challenging some of the boundaries and the stereotypes and the myths around neurodivergence as well. And so, you know, the Miss Girls of Autism, the Miss Girls of ADHD, and I'm not saying it's only females, but that is a population that has been underserved, underrepresented, under-researched. So, so to me, that it brings safety to have this growing awareness, and like you say, may prevent some people from getting to that crisis point much sooner.
And also people, you know, within treatment, you know, if you're going through eating disorder treatment, or maybe, you know, you're going through another mental health, you know, treatment for, you know, something else, what I would want everyone to know is that, you know, if you feel like you cannot recover, you can. It's just not built for your brain. So I think, you know, even if you're at that point where I was when I was 15 and you think this is just impossible, and I think everyone's going to feel like that, but I wouldn't want anyone to feel like they're the one that's broken because treatment's not working for them.
Absolutely.
So for me, I think that was such a common theme growing up for me. It was this feeling of being inherently broken. And, you know, I didn't get that impression from necessarily the people who were close to me. It was more, I guess, society's stigma and beliefs on people who, you know, and the expectations. And I put all my energy into, you know, being a high achiever and masking and everything like that. But always it just made me feel more and more broken, and I was getting more and more broken essentially. So I think for me, that feeling of being inherently broken was so fundamental to why, looking back, my brain developed these coping mechanisms to try and, I guess, instead of changing that environment, changing something about me.
Yeah. And when you talk about receiving messages of being broken, how were you receiving them? Was it because what other people were doing didn't seem as challenging? Was it because you had this feeling inside of you? Where were the messages coming from?
Yeah, I think for me, so I went to a very, for secondary school, you know, we know there's a common theme for, you know, people when you go from primary school to secondary school,
Yeah.
it can be a big shift. But I think for me, you know, even before secondary school, I think it's that feeling of things that I experience feel more difficult than what other people, you know, I find it more difficult to do things that other people can do more easily.
Yeah.
So, you know, I already were like developing phobias and things like that, and such high anxiety around things like going to the cinema, whereas like that would just be like an everyday like a every weekend sort of treat for a lot of people, or a birthday treat and things like that. And I could already see myself being isolated because of how much those environments, looking back, you know, I didn't know that at the time, but obviously now I can see that those environments weren't suited for me. But I think when you're almost that odd one out, it actually feels like there's something wrong with you. But now looking back, I know there's so many people who wouldn't of you know, you just have to find your community within that. But when you're in that environment and you feel like you're the only one who cannot access these things, you turn inwards and you blame yourself. And I think you isolate yourself and try and search within yourself, what is the issue within me? Why can't I do this? Why is it so difficult?
And I see this a lot. I see a lot of, some people are maybe more externalizers. You might see the meltdown more externally, or some visible form of behavior or mood shift that you can see, and even that can get misunderstood and mislabeled as well. But certainly internalization is something that we're growing much more aware of, because that can be the quiet, well-behaved child in the classroom. That can be the perfectionist getting good grades, the striver, the person who, you know, is coping maybe by some other methods like OCD, or, you know, the eating disorder can be communication, it can be coping, it can be all manner of things, can't it? So this is this expression, I think, so often of the internalized experience, where high masking comes in, so much suppression, and like you say, part of that internalization is what's wrong inside of me and what do I need to change inside of me.
Definitely. And I think, you know, exactly that. I think for me, and potentially quite a lot of other people will resonate with this, but, you know, it was just when sort of things that I started to struggle with, instead of externalizing that, I internalized it. And that is it becomes self-destructive, because even from a young age, if you're blaming yourself for basically the things that make you human, and also an autistic human now looking back, you know, it is that self-destructive. And I think even secondary school, you know, I was such a high masker, you know, I got the high grades and all of those things, but it genuinely broke me. And I think success for a lot of people is defined by how well you can conform to neurotypical standards, I guess, for a lot of people. You know, how high can you get your grades? You know, how well can you write that essay? You know, how many crazy things can you do on a night out? Whereas for me, that was not relatable, and that was so difficult. So for me, you know, I put all my energy into trying to do the things that I believed society would give me validation for. You know, I wanted to go on and be a doctor and things like this, like a psychologist and things. But now looking back, I can see that was what society had chosen for me, rather than, I guess, what I wanted to do and where my passions lay.
Okay. And at that time, were you aware of what your passions were?
It's really hard, because I think for me, so much of my identity was built around what other people wanted for me, or what society had shaped for me. So, you know, it's not a question of, do you want to go to uni? It's, you will go to uni, kind of thing. Yeah. And actually for me, I guess, when I describe it as, and this is an analogy, but I describe it as, like, for so long I was running on such a high speed treadmill. And for me, my eating disorder was something that threw me off that treadmill. And I guess part of recovery, through potentially conventional treatment methods, and this is just sort of my experience, but it's a lot about trying to get that person back on that treadmill. You know, they've had that blip, something's happened, but it's that returning back to their life before their eating disorder. Whereas for me, that was just impossible. I could never recover if I was going to return to environments that were going to make me sick again. So for me, and I guess the biggest advice I would say in terms of that journey for me is creating that new life, creating a life that worked for me, so I could, that I love and that I wanted. And it took many years to figure out what I actually wanted. What my future wanted to look like, what I could actually do. And I guess in a way it's almost like finding out I'm autistic, it set me free from a neurotypical life that was destroying me and allowed me to create a future that I truly wanted. Because no longer did I have to, follow the route that so many other people had trodden before me. I could take that scenic route.
Yes, yeah.
And the scenic route is bumpy. It is difficult because no one's ever done it before, but it has such beautiful views. Whereas if you're on that motorway and you're beeping your horns and trying to overtake people, you can get somewhere quickly, but it's not necessarily the most beneficial route for you. And I think that's something that I've probably reflected on quite a bit now.
And I think you've explained that so beautifully, by the way. And I think you touch on something incredibly important, which is the shaping of identity and how that can be so dissociated and disconnected from what your body and your mind are telling you. And I think this is, for many, a late identified neurodivergent person's experience, because so much energy has gone into reading other people, reading the environments and trying to fit in, that connection to self and the questions of what do I need aren't asked by others or ourselves. And so it's no wonder that we find ourselves not really knowing what we like, what we want, and we have to do a lot of work to figure that out.
Definitely, yeah.
You touched on treatment, and you talk about this in the book, and again, that was something else that just completely captivated me, and I was so happy to hear that voice. Conventional treatment works for some people, but conventional treatment, as it exists, as far as I'm aware, is not very flexible at all. And unfortunately, in my experience as a clinician and with some personal members, some friends, it has actually done more harm than good and has even created trauma for some people. So I want to kind of keep that. I'm not saying all treatment is terrible, but when there is a lack of flexibility and awareness of there are many routes to an eating disorder, many routes, and many all at once. Things can go horribly wrong.
Yes.
Tell us about your treatment experience.
Yeah, so I think, if I was to summarise it, in a very quick way, I guess for me it's that, especially in eating disorder treatment, I know that, when we think about the hospital environment, it's so overwhelming. There's bright lights, there's loud noises. That is not designed for someone who is undiagnosed autistic. And I look back and I think, when your nervous system is so at threat, you're in such a high level of anxiety that it's like paralysing. You're never going to heal. And I don't think I could have ever healed fully. Well, I don't think anyone ever heals fully, but I don't think I could have ever really truly started to heal in that environment. But even in the community, and I talk about this more in the book, but, it was when conventional treatment methods didn't work for me, I felt like I was broken, and actually that, I hadn't just failed at life, I had failed at, recovery too, and that was it for me. And I think I then believed that I was hopeless and, I wasn't ever going to be able to recover. I became situational mute because I felt that the way that I guess things were coming across to me from the treatment was that I was my eating disorder, and that was a fundamental belief. And again, that overlaps with identity, but, it's words like anorexic, diseased. Yeah. I believe that's who I was. And an eating disorder is such a horrific thing to go through, but it's not you. It's something that you have, but it is not who you are. So when you believe that it is who you are, this isn't just someone who thinks they're broken or, someone who believed that they were inherently broken. It's almost confirmation that, there is something fundamentally wrong with me. And that is not the case. If you have an eating disorder, again, there's nothing wrong with you. you have an eating disorder. It's not who you are. But that's what I believed, and that's how the messaging was coming across to me. And I just think a lot of the goals as well within that treatment model was, you progress in terms of, for me, and again, this isn't the same for everyone on their journey, but for me, physical rehabilitation, when that was in a better place, you'd go back to school. Now, telling that to someone who has a, restrictive eating disorder is not going to make them be able to lose that coping mechanism, because it actually proves that they need that coping mechanism to convey they can't go back to school. I couldn't go back to school because it made me so, it made me sick. So, with all of that, it led me to a place where I felt that there was no future for me, and that's why, I wanted to take my own life. And especially then, I think I lost my voice and became situational mute because I was so fundamentally, aware that everything that I said was my eating disorder, and therefore, it didn't deserve to be heard, and it's a very difficult thing to explain to people, because unless you've sort of lived through that, or you can, I guess, empathise with that experience, it's very difficult to understand why someone may not feel that their voice deserves to be heard. But I think for me, it was just this like overwhelming feeling that everything that I say is wrong, and it was, it was invalidated. It was, like, I don't know if dehumanised is the right word there, but, it wasn't treated, with that love and respect that, I needed at that time, in the treatment. So it was, it meant that I lost my voice.
I really agree with so much of what you're saying. And, again, like, we're not here to say everyone has this experience or all treatment is wrong, but this is the quieter voice, so we do need to raise it.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what we're here to do. Language is so crucial.
Yes.
Like, the way you speak to somebody, especially when they're vulnerable, is crucial.
Yeah.
And if you're using limiting language that doesn't relate but is disordering and othering, that can feed into all this underlying stuff of I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. That can really extinguish hope. And a lot of what I find as well is these goals and these markers of change and improvement and recovery are actually quite triggering for a lot of people. So constant weighing, measuring of food, where things that can get missed might be, I don't know, it could be like somebody might be coming online a bit more, so they might be texting their friends again. To me, that's a sign of recovery more than this awakening hypervigilance, which I think for some maintains and feeds in and makes things a lot worse.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's that assumption that your goals are going to be, I guess, shared by people who potentially quite neurotypical goals, essentially, like things like you would want to go back to school. And I'm not saying every neurotypical person enjoys school at all, but like it's that assumption that actually school is the best place for you. And actually that couldn't be further from the truth for me. So for me, hearing, oh, your reward is going back to school, for me that was the biggest punishment. So you really do have to seek to understand someone, it's not making those assumptions. And I think such an incredible part of my journey, and the reason that the book exists is my nurse. And that is because even in just those 10 minutes, he saved my life through giving me hope, love, empathy, person-centered care. Even in those 10 minutes and everything that followed, it wasn't just 10 minutes, it was then the years that followed. But even just in those 10 minutes, that gave me the ability to then speak again, because I felt safe enough to be heard. And it's an experience that even now I look back and I think it is so incredible that the impact in just those 10 minutes had. But I think for me, it is literally the reason that, I was able to find my voice again, that I had hope, because he sat with me in the dark. And I think that's one of the most incredible things you can do, is sit with someone in the dark instead of continuing to say to them, look, this light exists, but you can't feel it right now. So for me, sitting with me in the dark, and he said things like, I'm not giving up on you, I'll see you next week. that was actually my lifeline and my reason to keep myself alive into next week and the week after, and, you know, essentially save my own life and have the hope that I could save my own life, because yes, I come from a loving family and people do believe in me, you know, and I know that, but to hear that from a stranger, and especially in a clinical world, was life-changing. And, you know, your family are not your doctors. They shouldn't be your doctors.
Yeah.
That is a big assumption that can come with treatment, is that your family have to know what to do and what to do right. But you have to understand and have empathy for the family, that they're going through such a huge, you know, I guess, trauma that's secondary to that person, or, you know, the ripple effects of that person who's struggling's trauma, that actually, you know, they don't know that it's their first time living too. So for me to I guess hear that that someone cared and someone believed in me from a stranger who didn't know my past achievements, who didn't know what my exam results were, but also who didn't know my, I guess, my self-loathing and things like that, it was just so freeing. And I guess one of the most magical things, I think, as well, is that when you're autistic, you meet so many people in the healthcare world. You know, people come and go. You know, people don't tend to stick around that long. You know, as a generalised sort of observation there. You know, never before had anyone sort of, you know, sought to understand me instead of like patching me back up and sending me on my way.
Yeah.
I think a reoccurring theme was putting a plaster over a wound, but the bleeding for me was internal.
Yeah.
So for me, for my nurse to stick by me and actually to like not give up on me and actually, you know, continue to believe in me, he didn't have to do that, but the fact that he did was, you know, I think it's just like, it means more than words can say to an autistic person who I guess thought that they were unlovable, I guess.
Yes, I was going to say, a lot of what you're saying there sounds like what was provided was a relational safety. And I think what some treatment providers don't realise is they think that this is the right thing for that person, but so putting that plaster over and over and over the superficial wound, and not what's underneath, that doesn't create relational safety. Yet they believe that, and they do think they're doing the right thing. They're not doing it with ill intent. But, you know, that person receiving that may not even be able to articulate, or maybe they can, but they don't feel safe enough to say, this isn't right. And if you say this isn't right for me, you lack insight and
you don't engage.
And you need more treatment and treatment resistant and things like this. So, being able to trust your voice and express it is incredibly hard. In what treatment can do, it can be very disempowering. It sounded to me like what that nurse did might sound simple, but held the emotion, held what you were experiencing, trusted you, saw you, and was led by you to some degree, rather than pushing, forcing, and making you feel less safe.
Exactly, and I think that's exactly it. You know, it laid the foundations to which I could build a completely different life. And I think, you know, it would be unjust for me to say, you know, someone can save your life and that's it. You don't put in, you don't have to put in that, you know, that effort yourself. That isn't true. You know, you can't just wait for someone to come and save you. You have to save yourself. I think for me, what the incredible thing is that for me, having that hope allowed me to save my own life. So yes, he did, you know, save my life through giving me hope, through giving me that reason. And I truly believe that. But then working alongside each other, that meant that I could save my own life and also continue saving it, because ultimately, you know, even in appointments, that my appointments were so, you know, with my nurse was so important and so like monumental in my recovery. But you've still got the other 23 hours in a day that you have to then do that yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, for me, I think the the greatest gift for an autistic person is a society that's open to learning and open to change, but also people who have empathy. I think I will, always say empathy, because you do not have to go through something. You do not have to have had an eating disorder. You do not have to be autistic to want to seek to understand that, and to have empathy for someone in their darkest hours is just, it truly does save a life. I have been, even recently, in these situations where it's like you can be really, really vulnerable. You can show emotion. And to me, crying, for example, that is strength, because vulnerability is strength.
Absolutely.
For so long I couldn't cry. I couldn't cry in front of people because I was so internalized everything. So now to cry in front of people and do that is really vulnerable, but that is such, I'm so proud of that now. But to be met with that lack of empathy and that lack of compassion is so dangerous. And I think that's the biggest message I would say, is that people so often fret because they don't have the answers. And I don't think anyone has the answers truly. Like, I've written a book on autism and eating disorders, but I don't have the answers. I just, it's almost like a guide so you can find out the answers for your own recovery on your own journey, because it's not a one-size-fits-all model.
Exactly.
And that's what you need to move away from. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. You cannot write someone else's map for them.
No. And I think that's a really important, lots of important points, but one that I wanted to just come back to is I see a lot where the word risk, and there is real risk in eating disorders. People can get to, like you say, sitting in darkness, in a really, really dark place. That can be physically, that can be psychologically, that can be in terms of many things. And I think when that is present, a lot of people go into, we've got to save, we've got to rescue, and that can get, that in that way means people take control, or people feel frightened, feel scared, all kinds of things happen, for them, and changes their behaviour, or maybe makes it harder to listen and to trust, that person going through the eating disorder. A question always comes to me from parents is, but if I, for example, if she doesn't have the snack, then she's going to lose weight, or the snack's going to stop being part of like her eating cycle, and we're going to run into troubles. Like, that fear and that risk happens a lot, and I think it's we have to honour that, because it is frightening for other people, but also sometimes there's really good reasons why that person is wanting to change things. And I wondered if you ever experienced that, if risk was something that almost felt like it was turned against you and silenced you at times.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, clinicians can write the map, but they can't walk the journey. And I think that's it. But in a way as well, I guess you have to almost find your own way back home. And, for me, I think especially, in those environments, and when I was, I guess, clinically very unwell. I was very unwell before that, but it was only clinical when, I guess, it was also, you could see it more, and it was a physical health rather than just mental health, which is completely, invalidating and wrong, and obviously why people get sicker and sicker. But I think for me, there's this common theme in eating disorder treatment that that therapy should only really happen when someone is nutritionally stable. When they're not, I guess, an active risk, to use that, I guess, that phrasing. But I just think that is sort of part of the problem. I don't necessarily think it should be, the really deep and the really like trauma focused therapy necessarily. That can come later, and it needs to come later, to address that root cause. But I think what is important is to recognise the purpose and the importance of another kind of therapy. In people when they are really, really struggling, to leave them on their own and to tell them, look, this is the best for you. They're in their, they're going through the hardest thing of their life and saying this is for the best. That's not compassionate care. That can feel quite quite distant and quite, you know, humiliating almost. For me, it felt at that time, because almost for me it was like the worst days of my life, or worst periods of my life. And if this is the best, then what is life, I think. So I think for me, actually, I think therapy needs to happen in a different way when people are in their most vulnerable state.
And what could that look like? Because I've seen it look like things like actually baking, which sometimes people will say, yeah, but they're avoiding the food because they're baking it for others, not eating it. And actually, no, there's lots of sensory seeking going on there, lots of pleasure. And actually, that's building a relationship with food again. So it might be the closest step that they can take to doing that. It can be things like shopping. It could be going away for the weekend, or whatever that person can manage. To me, that can be therapy.
Yes.
What
Definitely.
would you say?
I think part of the reason why that person, you know, needs that therapy is because that is seeing them as an individual, rather than seeing them purely a textbook version of eating disorders. And I think that's the difference. You know, so often, and I remember this in my early treatment, it's things like, you know, you eat something in a certain way, or you don't eat something, things like that, and it's all, well, that's the eating disorder. But actually there's a multitude of reasons why someone avoids, for example, textures, or why someone doesn't want to eat in front of people. You know, it's not just purely the eating disorder, it's a bigger picture. And I think for me, even I think before, you know, my eating disorder, from a very young age, you know, before I was even 10, I would say, I would really struggle to eat at restaurants, you know, or eat because of the sensory experience. Not because of the food itself. It was because I didn't know what they were going to have. I didn't know how long we were going to be there. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what it was. When it comes, you don't know, you know, like just how you're going to navigate that. And that whole experience, you know, when we were, you know, even before that, you know, even not going out, it's just eating around people, you know, having to then deal with that social interaction. And it can feel quite intense if you're face to face with someone. It's like all of these things, but that's not really accounted for in eating disorder treatment, because the focus is the eating disorder. Whereas you have to see someone holistically. And in my case, it's, you know, it's an autistic person with an eating disorder, but once you recover from that eating disorder, you're still going to be autistic. And also a big part for me was also trauma. Like, the reason that I became unwell was trauma. It was the environment. As an undiagnosed autistic person, autism wasn't the reason I became unwell. Because I'm autistic now, and, you know, you can thrive and everything as an autistic person. That's not the issue. The issue is being autistic in a world not designed for you. But it's also, you know, trauma, as an autist, you know, experiencing trauma, and then also that added layer of then also being autistic and the way that process is, and, you know, being treated on a surface level, being in environments not designed for you, you know, all of that, looking back, it is so understandable of why I became unwell in a way, because I look back and I just think that is the perfect concoction, perfect storm for why someone could develop something in need of so much control, but also so detrimental and, you know, catastrophic as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You were talking a bit more there about autism, and I think that would be really interesting for our listeners to understand how, because you were late identified, your autism diagnosis came during your treatment period, was that right? How did, like, what corner did that help you turn, if at all?
Definitely. So autism was the turning point in my recovery, or one of the turning points. I think for me, in early treatment, and in treatment that, you know, looking back wasn't designed for me, when I wasn't making that progress, autism was seen as something that complicated things. It was almost like we couldn't even bring up the word autism, because to think about autism is distracting from the fact that this person is unwell with an eating disorder. Now, I think that you have to see someone holistically. Autism doesn't complicate things. To an extent, it simplifies things. So when my treatment team changed, and I, you know, then was working with my nurse, we brought up autism again, tentatively, because obviously for a long time it had been almost dismissed and seen as another layer of complication, or even an excuse to why we're not dealing with the eating disorder, almost, is how it kind of came across.
Interesting.
But then it was met with such, like, enthusiasm, or, like, you know, it was so, like, yeah, let's explore this. And actually that was huge, because when I then got my autism diagnosis and I found out I was autistic, you know, for me, the first thing that I said when I found out I was autistic was, this is incredible.
Yeah.
And that's because at last, for someone growing up truly and, like, fundamentally believing there was something wrong with them, finding out I'm autistic set me free, because no longer did I blame myself for the things that made me human, for the things that made me an autistic human. And it was so freeing. People often think that autism is what allows someone, you know, or, you know, allow someone to magically recover from their eating disorder. That isn't true, because I was autistic, and I've always been autistic, but at the end of the day I still had an eating disorder that I had to recover from. But what autism diagnosis, or identification as well, allowed me to do is to save my own life in a way that worked for my autistic brain. I think that was, for so long, the barriers that I was coming against in recovery, and actually I was getting more unwell in recovery, because there was almost added barriers in addition to the already barriers that you have when you have an eating disorder and having to fight your own brain. Other barriers, like, you know, having to overcome things that, being autistic, those were things that I didn't have to overcome, you know. So with my nurse, it was almost this perspective change, because no longer did I have to, you know, overcome having to force myself to, like, interact with other people and force myself to have to go back to school. I remember saying, you know, I was like, when I get to a certain place, will I have to go back to school? Because that was the messaging that I had always been told. And he was like, no, you don't have to. And my body language has changed. And from that moment, it was like a key, and it unlocked something that I felt safe.
Yeah.
Like, even just feeling safe that if you do recover, there's not going to be consequences, you know, for your progress.
Absolutely.
In a way.
Absolutely. And some of what you're saying there makes me think that when you received, or when people were wondering about whether you might be autistic, that, like you said, that was considered complex, and therefore it's going to make all of this recovery harder. And actually, I love what you said there about, in some way, simplifying, because if it doesn't sound like it was, you know, jumped on straight away and thought, oh great, this is going to help help create the map, because that's what it should be used to create the map, shouldn't it? If you understand about your sensory profile, that's going to help about your relationship to food, the environment that you're in, what's going to actually put you in a fight, flight, freeze, which is likely to mean that you have, you know, you're not hungry, or you don't feel safe enough to eat. So even when we say environment, we actually mean environment. We mean the colours that are around you, the lighting, the smell of the food, the texture, what you're being given, the cutlery. Like, for some people, the you know, how cutlery feels is going to affect their relationship in that moment. So I believe, and I have seen so often, how aspects of understanding your autistic profile and traits can be so part of that map.
Definitely. And I think, you know, I don't know if this is for everyone, but certainly from my own experience, I just ask myself the question, is anyone actually a complex case? We hear that term in the medical field, but is anyone actually complex? Because it just takes one person to seek to understand them, and then that simplifies it. Because for me, for so many years, it's like, you know, you're too complex because, you know, you kind of fit 3-4 boxes. You have to only choose one box at a time. So you can't, you know, be autistic and have OCD, or, you know, have an eating disorder and have trauma and be autistic, and things like that. And actually, I think what allowed me to, and I hate the term revolving door patient, but I think for me, I can see these cycles, and I can know that I would continue to be back in treatment again and again and again for the shape-shifting surface level mental health problem. But because my nurse sought to understand me, and we did that work and we found that root cause, and we started to address that root cause, I don't go round in those circles anymore.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because people come to me a lot and say I'm quite articulate and things like that, which is really sort of quite crazy to me, because for so long I didn't understand any of this. Like the things that I'm sharing today, I didn't understand any of this, But for me, it really does take that. You just need that opportunity to have that time, have that safe space to actually unwrap yourself and actually understand yourself. And you can then understand almost these connections of, okay, maybe I became, one of the reasons that I became unwell was because of this, and thinking, okay, how can we do this differently so that doesn't repeat itself? And otherwise, if you don't address those things and you truly just treat recovery on that surface level approach, that it's all about physical rehabilitation, if that's appropriate for you, or it's all about just the food itself, and making sure your intake is appropriate for what the textbook says and things like that. If you only address that, sure, you might get to a place where you look well again, or you seem well, but are you actually okay inside? And that's the self-fulfilling prophecy, is that if you don't address the things that are continuing to make you sick in whatever form they take, you will just continue to need those coping mechanisms to survive.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then that word complexity weaves its way in, doesn't it? And those terms, revolving door patient. And for those of you, that aren't familiar with that, it's when somebody presents its services repeatedly, and these these are sharp summaries of people, to call somebody complex, to say they're treatment resistant, a revolving door patient. There's a lot of hopelessness in that, isn't there? So, if someone says that to us, or someone believes that about us, that is going to affect us, and it's going to affect how they relate to us.
Because I've had this even recently, I've had it where people have been like, you've exhausted all possibilities.
Yeah.
Or, things like that. And I guess for me, what has changed about me now, I guess now where I'm at in terms of my recovery, and not just eating disorder, in terms of my I guess holistically my mental health and things like that, what's changed about me now, even though I do still struggle, it would be unrealistic to say that I'm completely 100% okay, but for me, what's changed now is that I know that there is hope. So when I struggle with my trauma or things like that, and I need to process that and things like that, I know that there is hope. And I 100% believe that you can get better. There can be days that are better than the day you're currently experiencing. You can create your own happy ending. I truly believe there is hope. But I think a lot of the time we come against these barriers, and people saying you've exhausted all possibilities, or things like that. It's almost a way of trying to take away that hope and say, actually, where you're at, what you need to do is accept this is your reality. But what's different for me now compared to potentially before my eating disorder, is that I don't accept that when I'm really struggling, this has to be my reality. I always believe that there is hope and that you can get better. Yeah. And I'm not saying 100%, all of the time. That's unrealistic. But I know that there is hope, and actually the darkest days, of your life, or of the week that you've just had, you believe that that's forever. But I think for me now, yes, it is heavy when you experience those weeks, or those days, or those months, or those periods that feel like it's going to last forever. Yes, it is excruciatingly difficult, but what I know now is that there is hope, and that it always can get better, and I refuse to believe or accept that reality has to be it for the rest of my life. That you can't recover from trauma, you can't process it. I just think if one avenue doesn't work, if one medication doesn't work, if one treatment model or method or thing like that doesn't work for you, that is not your only option.
Yeah,
there are other options out there.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really strong thread throughout your book, through the message of your book, throughout your personal story, that providing hope is often, if ever, written in a treatment plan. But it's just, overlooked. It's not a psychological concept. It's not, a medication. But it's like it from what you're, the way you're describing it, it was such a core feature of what you needed in order to take other steps towards wherever you needed and wanted to go, and what that looked like. And I think, your book really is a beautiful reminder of that there is, in it, and it aids people to make that, explore their identity, explore their needs outside of what a treatment plan might look like. And, to me, it feels like this is the map towards hope as well.
Thank you. And I think that's it. Exactly. What you said there. You read your notes, and it sounds like a different person.
Mm-hmm.
You read your notes, and it's almost so heavy. It's so based on what is quote unquote wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
You may experience symptoms. You may experience traits of, being autistic or whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with you.
Mm.
To see autism as a problem is a fundamental flaw
Mm-hmm.
in the medical model, but not in who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, for me, I know that what is, and I think that was so freeing for me in terms of writing the book, is that so often you read things that are written about yourself, your notes and things, that becomes your identity.
Mm.
Or it shapes your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I guess my book was a way of actually, no, I'm gonna define what it means to be me.
Yes.
And I'm going to, share my story, and I'm gonna, express my likes, my dislikes, and tell it how I want to tell
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think that was so life-changing, because I don't think ever before had I told my story and wrote it in the way that I wanted it to be written.
Yeah, and you do that beautifully, while at the same time not saying you have to do it my way, giving people space to discover that for themselves, while saying what worked for you, saying really an antithesis to a lot of what you experienced.
Yeah, and that's it. I actually think, for me as an autistic person, some of what I write in the book is, I want to know the why. I want to know why things happen. I want to know, with eating disorders, I spent so long trying to find the why. Why am I like this, and what is wrong with me? And I guess for me, it was reshaping it, actually. Why am I like this, but what do I need?
Mm-hmm.
And what can I do differently? And I think, for me, my book is a starting point for people to then go on their own journeys, or maybe someone to something to come with them on their journey.
Yeah.
Because for me, no one can tell you what to do. And I think, as in, no one can give you the magic wand. And that's such a common phrase we hear in terms of people in treatment. It's like, what would you want if you waved a magic wand? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I want to be free. I want to be happy. But there's no quick fix. There's no one size fits all. And actually, you have to figure that out for yourself. And I think potentially for me, such a huge barrier for such a long time was waiting for something that was finally going to work, and something that was finally going to fix me. But I think for me, it was realising I don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with me, but also I can save my own life. Mm-hmm. I can empower myself to save my own life, and I can do that, in a way that works for me. Mm-hmm. I would read books because I'd want them to almost cure me in a way.
Yeah.
But now I can see that actually they are the starting point, or they are what comes with you on your journey. Yeah. But you almost have to write your own book of how to recover for yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really something that I've reflected and had to learn a lot on my journey as well.
And to do that, to write your own, way out, is to know yourself and to be freed up to do that exploration, not to borrow someone else's treatment plan or someone else's way. That might inform you, that might fit, but it really might not. So I completely relate to that and see the importance of that. We're almost out of time, Rachel.
It's gone so quick.
It has gone really quickly, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask you, you know, at this point in your life, having now written a book and had all this self-discovery, is there anything that you feel to maybe somebody further, I don't want to say down the line, but you know, just at a different point in time in their eating disorder recovery or in their autistic identification, is there anything that you would like to say to them about, you know, to give voice to you that you think could reach them, that you think could reach them in their dark moments?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is there is hope. You know, there is hope. And I think so often, you know, it was 4 years ago when I was, you know, in my darkest hours and I wanted to end my own life. And that was 4 years ago. For me to now be sitting here today and say that I'm happy that I survived, you know, that's huge. But I never thought that would be possible.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, do not look at, you know, I used to look at people who were further down the line and think, you know, that's amazing, but that could never be me. But for me, I do not want anyone to think that I am the anomaly. Like, I am someone who's able to recover, but they can't either.
Yeah.
You can. There is nothing that, you know, sets me apart from other people that they can save their own life. The only difference is that, you know, I've begun that journey to saving my own life, you know, and anyone can do that. You know, it's not, you do not have to be, you know, have the answers to ask those questions. And I think, you know, I just wouldn't want anyone to look at me and think, you know, it's amazing for her to be able to have done that, but I can't do that. But that was me 4 years ago. You know, that was me. That exactly the same. I was saying to myself, I could never do this. Like, I don't want to live. I can't survive. But now, 4 years later, I guess I know that there is hope, and I know that you can do it. And yes, it feels impossible, but I just want people who are listening or watching this to believe it is possible. And there's nothing that I can do or say to make it easier. And that breaks my heart, because it's like, I wish I could make it easier for people, apart from just saying that I believe in you and I know that you can do it and there is hope. And 4 years from now, or however long from now, you know, you will be able to start, you know, doing the things that you once dreamt of. And I have no doubt in my mind that people can't do that.
Such powerful words. I believe in you, aren't they?
And that's like what my nurse said to me. You know, I believe in you. There is hope. I'm not giving up on you. And I think that has the power to save a life, and allow someone to save their own life as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming here in the heat wave. We survived the lights and the closed room. It's been such a pleasure to meet you in person. Thank you, and to share your story. So thank you once again, Rachel, for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be heard.